We are going to discuss about D.P.Mukherji's contribution to the Marxist perspective for the Indian society. The dialectical historical orientation, which is related primarily to Marxist methods and propositions for the analysis of social reality. Marxist approach comprises several adoptive models. Many innovations have been made on classical Marxist formulations for the study of Indian society. Indian sociologists reformulated and tested against societal realities of various historical origins to validate them as universal or particular categories in sociology. The study of Indian social reality from the Marxian perspective has been conducted by scholars such as A.R.Desai and D.P.Mukherji, popularly called as D.P. as one of the founding fathers of sociology in India. He was born on 5th October 1894 in West Bengal in a middle class Bengali family. D.P. began his career at Bangabasi College, Calcutta in 1922. He joined the newly founded Lucknow University as a lecturer in economics and sociology. Radhakamal Mukherji, the first professor in the department, was responsible for bringing D.P. to Lucknow. In 1953, he served as a visiting professor of sociology at the International Institute of Social Studies. He was the first president of the Indian Sociological Conference and also vice president of the International Sociological Association. He was a Marxist, but liked to call him Marxiologist, a social scientist of Marxism. He analyzes Indian society from Marxian perspective of dialectical materialism. More than his writings, through lectures and discussions, D.P. shaped the minds of youth and made them to think for themselves. Shaping men is enough for me, he told to his students. He commanded over philosophy, economic thought, sociological theories, literature and music. He was a unique scholar who developed critical faculty, enabled him to relate all scholarly details to the problems facing men and culture today. D.P. was pioneer in the field of sociology of culture. In his work on Indian history, a study in method, D.P. discusses the relevance of Marxist method to understand history. He emphasizes the need for philosophy and historical matrix in understanding any society. D.P.'s intellectuality was explored in his ideas not in written form, but rather was in the classroom, the coffee house or the drawing room. He as a teacher was very popular amongst his students. He encouraged dialogue and interchange of ideas with his students. D.P. Mukherji was popular of the pioneers in Indian sociology. He resisted compartmentalization of knowledge in social science. He was a social philosopher in sociology. He ended up as an advocate of empiricism involving spiritual feelings. D.P. was interested in understanding the nature and meaning of Indian social reality rooted in the Indian tradition and finding out the ways of how to change it for promoting welfare of the common people by adapting the forces of modernity to the specificity of the Indian tradition. He was a dogmatic Marxist, as Marxism was his method of analysis rather than a political ideology. His dialectical analysis of Indian history suggested that tradition and modernity, colonialism and nationalism, individualism and collectivism could be seen as dialectically interacting with each other in contemporary India. D.P. was tolerant of Western ideas, concepts and analytical categories. He felt the need for indigenous sociology and social anthropology. Being a Marxiologist rather than Marxist, attempted a dialectical interpretation of the encounter between the Indian tradition and modernity, which led free forces of cultural contradictions during colonial era. His focus was more on historical specificity of India's cultural and social transformation, which was characterized less by class struggle and more by value, assimilation and cultural synthesis that resulted from the encounter between tradition and modernity. D.P. never indulged in empirical exercises of data collection of survey. He did not believe in the inherent value of empiricism. He liked to be a social critic, social philosopher and culturologist. His academic interests were diverse, ranging from music and fine arts as creations of Indian culture. He was against maintaining rigid barrier between one social science discipline and another, and had interest in the study of structure and change in the Indian society. D.P. was one of the social scientists who recognized the importance of Marxism to analyze socio-economic forces operating in human society. According to him, Marxism as a theory was founded on the priority of society and group which are separate and exterior to man, the individual a sort of environment to facilitate and hinder opening the capacities of the autonomous individual isolate. His interest was in the Marxian method rather than in any dogmas. He warned the unhistorically minded young Marxist ran the risk of ending up as a fascist, and Marxism could lose its effectiveness in a maze of slogans. D.P. considered personal documents products of his endeavor to formulate an adequate concept of social sciences. He organized his ideas around the notion of personality. He appealed that social science theories should not be abstract individual, but should be holistic psychosociological approach. It is the synthesis of the double process of individuality and the uniqueness of socialization of individual life that personality will be understood. He had come to sociology from economics and history to develop his personality through knowledge. According to him, knowledge and knower has to be seen together. Knowledge has to be philosophic, thought based on empirical data. The Indian intellectuals borrowed world view based on Western liberal outlook. The element of purpose has been pointed out as progress is not a stage in automatic self-generating evolution. Progress for D.P. is balancing of values, and he had taken from religious scriptures to identify the hierarchy of values. His contributions are personality. D.P. propounded the thesis of Purusha. The Purusha, according to him, is not isolated from society and individual or under the control of group mind. The Purusha established the relationship with others as an active agent and discharges responsibilities. Purusha grows as a result of his relations with others and occupies a better place among human groups. He accepts that Indian social life is like the bees and beavers, and the Indians are regimented people, but beauty of it is that the majority do not feel regimented. He doubts that Western man has freedom at all, as he is dominated by the market system and exposed to the manipulations of advertisements, press, chains, and his purse is emptied. Because of this, there is no scope for individuals' right of choice and consumers' sovereignty. In contrast, the low level of aspiration of average Indian moderated by group norms results in poise in life. D.P. says Indian sociologists should accept the group as unit and eject the individual. This is because of Indian tradition. Indian sociologists should understand the nature of this tradition. Modern Indian culture. D.P.'s sensitive nature influenced him by environment around him. He drew from traditional culture as well as modern. Synthesis has been the dominant organizing principle of Indian culture. The British rule provided a real turning point to the Indian society. The middle class helped in the consolidation of British rule in India, but later challenged it. D.P.'s vision of India was a peaceful, progressive India born out of union of diverse elements of distinctive regional culture. Reorientation to tradition was an essential condition of moving forward. Indian national movement was anti-intellectual, though it generated idealism. He concludes by saying that politics has ruined our culture. According to Line, modernization is not possible through imitation. He feared culture imperialism. Modernization is a process of expansion, elevation, revitalization of traditional values and cultural patterns. Tradition is a principle of continuity. It gives us freedom to choose from different alternatives. Modernity should be defined in relation to and not in denial of tradition. Tradition. D.P. opines that tradition comes from the root traduce, which means to transmit. In Sanskrit, it means parampara, succession, or itihasa or history. Traditions have a source. It may be scriptures or statements of sages mythical heroes with or without names. The historicity of traditions is recognized by people. They are quoted, recalled, esteemed. Their age-long succession ensures social cohesion and social solidarity. Dynamics of tradition. Tradition performs the act of conserving. D.P. asserts that traditions do change. Three principles of change are recognized in Indian traditions: Shruti, Smriti, Anubhava. It is Anubhava or personal experience which is the revolutionary principle. Personal experience of the saint founders of different sects or panths blossomed into collective experience, producing change in the existing socio-religious order. The experience of love and sahaj or spontaneity of the saints and the follower was noticed in the Sufis among the Muslims. The traditional system slowly accommodated the dissenting voices. Indian social action has coordinated rebel within the limits of the constitution. The result has been the caste society sharpened the class consciousness of disadvantaged. Dialectics of tradition and modernity. The Indian tradition's strength is its crystallization of values. India conserved many values, good and bad. India utilized the forces foreign to Indian tradition like technology, democracy, urbanization and bureaucracy. According to D.P., though adjustments occur, Indians may not vanish at the touch of Western culture. Indians are flexible as Indian culture assimilated many indigenous descents. The Hindu-Muslim culture was developed and also a blending of cultures, Varasankara. Traditionally, Indians' blood has adjusting nature. The idea of complete man or well-balanced personality is a blend of moral fervor and aesthetic and intellectual sensibility with the senses of history and rationality. Rationality is emphasized by modernity than by the Indian tradition. Hence, dialectics between the tradition and modernity lies in understanding the tradition. D.P. observes that the knowledge of traditions shows the way to break them with the least social cost. He argues that there is dialectical relation between India's tradition and modernity. Colonialism and nationalism and individualism and collectivity, Sangha, his concept of dialectics was anchored in liberal humanism. He argues that traditions are central to the understanding of Indian society. The relations between modernization and traditions are dialectical. D.P.'s definition of traditions from perspective of dialectics is that the encounter of tradition with modernization created certain cultural contradictions, adaptations and situations of conflict. The encounter between tradition and modernity ends up with these consequences: conflict and synthesis. Indian society is the result of interaction between tradition and modernity. It is the dialectics helps us to analyze Indian society. D.P. characterizes traditions in the context of Indian culture as a social and historical process. Indian culture represents common traditions that gave rise to general attitudes. The major influences in their shaping have been Buddhism, Islam, Western commerce and culture. Because of this assimilation and conflict of varying forces, Indian culture is what is today. Neither Hindu nor Islamic nor Western mode of living. He was confident that future would transcend the present in true dialectical movement. He said not to politicize culture. Composition of traditions. Indian tradition is the resultant of certain historical processes. Indian traditions belong to ideologies of Buddhism, Islam, Christianity and Western modernity. The process of synthesis has constructed these traditions. It is the combination of traditions and various ethnic groups. D.P. classifies Indian traditions as primary, secondary and tertiary. The primary traditions have been primordial and authentic to Indian society. The secondary traditions arrived with Muslims in the country. In the tertiary traditions, differences survived. Indian traditions are synthesis of Vedanta, Western liberation and Marxism. Nature and method of sociology. D.P. pointed that progressive groups failed in the field of intellect and also in economic and political actions because of their ignorance and unrootedness in Indian social reality. Social reality has many and different aspects, and it has its traditions and future. To understand this social reality, one should have a comprehensive and synoptic view. The nature of interactions of its various aspects, the interplay of its tradition and the forces leading to a changed future. Sociology can be great help here. Sociology helps in an integral view of life and social reality. D.P. stresses that task of sociology is to understand the nature of forces that sustain a society over the time. D.P. said that sociologists of India must understand the nature of traditions which conserved Indian society for centuries. Sociology should show the way out of the social system by analyzing the process of transformation. Sociological analysis of Indian society shows that it is changing without disintegration. D.P. said that Indian sociologist should not only be a sociologist, but an Indian. He should share the folkways, mores, customs and traditions for the purpose of understanding social system. Indian sociologist goes with two approaches. Comparative approach highlights features shared by the Indian society with other societies and also the specificity of its tradition. Sociologist can examine its symbols and values. At the same time, he also takes dialectical approach to understand conflict and synthesis of opposing forces of conservation and change. Marxism in Indian situations. D.P. had faith in Marxism. He feels that Marxism gives an idea of desirable higher stage in the development of human society. In the higher stage, personality becomes integrated with other in society through a planned, socially directed, collective with other in society through a planned, socially directed and collective endeavor for historically desired end. He doubts the efficacies of the analysis of Indian social phenomena by the Marxist. Reasons are: the Marxist may analyze everything in terms of class conflicts. Class conflict has been covered by the caste traditions and the new class relations have not yet emerged. Many of them are ignorant of the socio-economic history of India. Traditions have great powers of resistance. Change of modes of production may overcome this resistance. A speed change may be achieved by violent revolutions only. If a society opts for revolutions by consent without bloodshed, it must work out the direct of economic changes and tradition. D.P. emphasizes that Indian sociologists study Indian traditions and precede the socialist interpretations of change in the Indian traditions in terms of economic forces. D.P. rejection of positivism of Western social sciences. D.P. was against the positivism of Western social sciences. The industrial culture turned individuals into self-seeking agents, also reduced into biological or psychological units. Positivism uprooted man from these social moorings. According to D.P., conception of man is Purusha, not the individual or Vyakti. Purusha develops through his cooperations with the others around him by shoring of values and interest of life with members of his group. Individual action, common Indian does not experience the fear of frustration. Role of the new middle classes. The urban industrial order introduced by the British in India set aside the older institutional networks. It called for adoption and adjustments. In this new setup, the educated middle classes of the urban cities of India became focal point of the society. They came to command the knowledge of the modern social forces, science, technology, democracy and a sense of historical development. Middle classes were soaked with the Western ideas and lifestyles. They were happy, ignorant about Indian culture and realities. They were not aware of Indian traditions. But traditions have great powers of resistance and absorption. They are important in transfiguration of physical adjustments and biological urges. India's middle classes could not lead masses on modern lines. They were uprooted from their indigenous traditions, they lost contact with the masses. India can move all to modernity by adopting it to her traditions. Her traditions, if middle classes re-establishes their link with the masses, they should not harness its vitality for accommodating changes required by modernity. A balance between individuation and association will be achieved and India will be enriched with the new experience. For D.P., Indian history could not be made by outsides, it has to be enacted by the Indian themselves. Specific and crisis refuses specificity of contact between India and England or the West making involves changing, which requires a deep understanding of the crisis, scientific study of the tendencies which make up specificity. According to D.P., the first task is to study social traditions in which by external and internal pressures when modes of production are altered, traditions survive by the adjustments. The capacity for adjustments is the measure of the vitality of traditions. About modernization, D.P. points out that Indian history is not about class hatred or partition, had been the result of arrested assimilation of Islamic values. He believed that history halts until it is pushed. D.P.'s stand on modernization could not be genuine through imitation. People could not abandon their own culture, heritage, yet succeeded in internalizing the historical experience of other people. They were ready to be taken over. He feared cultural imperialism. The important approach according to him was the efforts of Ram Mohan Roy and Rabindranath Tagore, who tried to make the Western thought and action run through the Indian to remove weeds in order that the ancient stream might flow. D.P. formulated his view of dialects between tradition and modernity. According to D.P., the nature and dynamics of modernization emerged as a historical process which is an expansion, an elevation, a deepening and revitalization. A larger investment of traditional values and cultural patterns and not the departure from them, resulting from the interplay of the traditional and the modern. From this perspective, tradition is a condition rather than obstacle to modernization. It evolves a cultural pattern which is the synthesis of the old and the new. Modernity is defined in relation to tradition, but not in denial. Conflict is the intermediate stage in the dialectical triad. The movement is toward coincidental opposition. Self-consciousness is the form of modernization. D.P.'s work on music is a sociological piece. According to him, Indian music is an arrangement of sounds. He shows that Indian and Western music had come from classical content. Akshay Ramanlal Desai, 1915–1994, was born on April 16, 1915 at Nodal in Gujarat. A well-known literature who inspired the youth in Gujarat in the 30s. A.R.Desai took part in student movements in Baroda, Surat and Bombay. He took PhD in sociology under G.S. Gurye from Bombay University. Among Indian sociologists who advocated and applied dialectical historical model in his sociological studies, he was influenced by the works of Marx and Engels. He was regarded as one of the pioneers in introducing modern Marxist approach to empirical investigations involving bibliographical and field research. Among Indian sociologists, Desai alone applied Marxist methods in treatment, knowing of Indian social structures and its processes. He was a doctrinaire Marxist. Desai rejects interpretation of tradition with reference to religion, rituals and festivities. He says it is a secular phenomenon which originates and develops from economics. All his studies are based on Marxist method of social transformation or from the nexus among the capitalist bourgeois, the rural petty bourgeois and the state apparatus all from similar social roots. The contradiction is not resolved, it takes new forms and re-emerges in the form of protest and social movements. The social unrest is rooted in the capitalist path of development followed by India. Village structure. Indian village was self-sufficient unit in pre-British period. Population of village was peasants. They enjoyed traditional hereditary right to cultivate holidays from generation to generation. Village was based on agriculture, which was practiced by means of primitive equipment. The village council was the de facto owner of the village land. All the products produced by the village workers were confined to village community, as there were no exchange relations with the outside world. Individual was subordinate to the caste, family and the village panchayat. The culture was feudal in nature. Society was economically low, stationary and socially rigid. Changes were quantitative, not qualitative in nature. The British conquest of India resulted in the transformation of pre-British India from feudal to capitalist economy. Capitalist way of development in political and economic policies was adopted by British government for trade, industry and finance. The new economic reforms of British introduced new land relations and industries in place of old land relations and artisans. The village commune was replaced by modern peasant proprietors or zamindars as private owners of land. Artisan class disappeared with modern industry. New classes like the capitalist, industrial workers, agricultural laborers, tenants, merchants emerged. The British impact led to transformation of the economic anatomy, social physiognomy of Indian society, new land revenue system, commercialization of agriculture and fragmentation of land in Indian village. Consequentially, the growing polarization of classes in agrarian areas, poverty in rural areas and exploitation by owners of land, new class in agrarian society emerged like zamindars, absentee landlord, tenants, peasant proprietors, agricultural laborers, money lenders and merchant class. On the other side, in urban society, capitalist, industrial working class, petty traders, professional class like doctors, lawyers, engineers, etc. The British government introduced railways, postal services, English education and many others which brought qualitative change. The role of railways and press were important in this direction. The implication was social movements, national sentiments. Consciousness among Indian people, social infrastructural setup gave rise to nationalist freedom movement. Social background of Indian nationalism. Desai applied Marxist approach to the study of nationalism in India, historical dialectical materialism to study various movements, rural urban, caste and class structure, social mobility and other aspects. He employs production relations for the explanation of traditional social background of Indian nationalism. According to Desai, India's nationalism is the result of material conditions created by the British colonialism. They developed new economic relations by introducing industrialization and modernization. The economic relationship is predominantly a stabilizing factor in the continuity of traditional institutions in India, which would undergo changes as these relations would change. Desai thinks that traditions are linked with economic relations. The change in the latter would change the traditions. He thinks that caste will disintegrate with the creation of new social and material conditions. Desai's dialectical history of India shows that traditions have their own roots in India's economy and production relations. His analysis of the emergence of the various social forces was that the state which emerged in India after independence was a capitalist state. The relation between the state and the capitalist class was explored. The administrative apparatus of the state performed twin functions of protecting the properties, classes and the suppressing the struggles of the exploited classes. He supported the alliance with the progressive bourgeois of semi-feudalism of foreign imperialist control over Indian economy and postulated two-stage theory of revolution or accepted peaceful parliamentary road to socialism in India. Peasant struggles. Desai highlighted the difference in the character of struggles then and now. At present, agrarian struggles was waged by the nearly emerged propertied classes as well as the agrarian poor. The agrarian proletariat fight for the greater share is for the fruits of development. The pauperized, the peasants and laborers who were poor, belonging to low caste and tribal communities struggle for survival and for a better life for themselves. Thus, for Desai, progress can be achieved by radically transforming the exploitative capitalist system in India. State and society. Desai was a critic of the theories of modernization of academic establishments. He stated that in reality, the assumed modernization on capitalist path a desirable value premise, it served as a valuable ideological vehicle to the ruling class pursuing the capitalist path. He pointed on the violation of the democratic rights of minorities, women, slum dwellers in urban India, press and others by the state. According to Desai, the polarization of class interest of the bourgeois is the foundation of modern society in India. It has inherent in it the class contradictions and the logic of its dialectic. Marxist approach. According to Desai, the Marxist approach helps one to raise relevant questions, conduct researchers in the right direction, formulate adequate hypotheses, adopt and combine appropriate research techniques and locate the central tendencies of transformation with its major implications, helps to understand the social reality through the means of production, the techno-economic division of labor involved in operating the instruments of production and social relations of production property relations existed in the eve of independence in India. Desai argues that property relations determine the norms about who shall get how much and on what grounds. Thus, it endeavors to locate within a specific society the forces which preserves and forces which prompt it to change. Desai argues that property relations determine the norms about who shall get how much and on what grounds. Thus, it endeavors to locate within a specific society the forces which preserves and forces which prompt it to change. That is, Desai thinks that the methodology is apt to understand social reality from the ideology of capitalism. According to Desai, the bourgeois is the dominant class in India. Indian society is capitalist economy. Dominant culture in India is culture of the dominant capitalist class. Indian capitalism was born during the declining phase of world capitalism. Here, he argues that Indian bourgeois built up a fundamentally secular bourgeois democratic state, which is imparting modern scientific, technological and liberal democratic education. This class and its intelligentsia supporting and spreading old religious and idealistic philosophic concepts among people. The idealistic and religio-mystical philosophies of the ruling bourgeois class, reinforced by crude mythological culture rampant among the masses, constitute dominant culture of the Indian people today. The social role played by culture is reactionary, since it gives myopic picture of the physical universe and the social world, a misexplanation of the fundamental causes of the economic and social crisis, opiates the consciousness of the masses and diverts the latter from advancing on to solutions of their problems. The study of Indian social reality from the Marxian perspective has been conducted by scholars such as D.P.Mukherji and A.R.Desai. D.P. was one of the founding fathers of sociology in India. The dialectical historical orientation is related primarily to Marxist methods and propositions for the analysis of social reality. Many innovations have been made on classical Marxist formulations for the study of Indian society. Through lectures and discussions, D.P. shaped the minds of youth and made them think for themselves. A.R.Desai rejects interpretation of tradition with reference to religion, rituals and festivities. As it is secular, his studies are based on Marxist method of historical dialectical materialism, the social unrest rooted in the capitalist path of development followed by India.